I recently had a very frightening experience. It all started when my friend started living alone. I'm just going to call her A for the sake of anonymity. A lived at home until she was in her early 20s and loved it, but she felt as if it was time to spread her wings and find her own place. She found a really great place for a decent price and began living alone. I remember how excited she was about moving in. Well, it was all smiles to begin with, but after about a month, she came to the realization that she was being stalked. And she had no idea of the identity of her stalker. When she told me that she thought she was being stalked, I thought, wow, that's a bit of a bold claim. I wondered if she kept seeing the same person in different places and was a little paranoid. I was proven very wrong. It was serious. Whenever she came home from work, she would always check the mail. Not too long into her new life in her apartment, she found something in her letter cage at the front door. There was an envelope. It was just a blank envelope. It must have been hand-delivered. She said that before she opened it, she felt sick to her stomach. She didn't tell anyone besides me and her family her new apartment's address, so she knew that this envelope was hiding some strange contents. She opened it up and read what was inside. "Your underwear color is pretty flashy." That was all that was written there. When she told me that, I was genuinely terrified for her. I thought of how I would react if I found that, and how frightened that would make me feel, especially if I had just started living alone for the first time. She received that creepy letter about a month after she moved in. She asked me what I would do if I were her, and I told her honestly. I would go back home, and I would live with my parents for a while, maybe for good. The apartment might be the target of a stalker. Maybe that's why the last person moved out, and maybe that's why she got a great deal on it. That's what I thought at the time. A wasn't interested in going back home. Her new place was much closer to work for her commute. She could get to work in 20 minutes or so. If she went home, then it would take 3 times, if not 4 times longer. She said that she was looking for a new place to live, and she told the renters she wanted to go. She seemed like she had a hold on things. Maybe it wouldn't be too bad, but for me, I wouldn't want to spend another second in that apartment if I received a letter like that. Things kind of simmered down for a while, maybe close to a month. I didn't really hear from A again during that time. One evening I got a message from her. All it said was, "There's been another letter." She took a photo of the contents of the letter, and there were just 5 sentences. I wish I had the photo to share, but it happened about 3 phones ago. When the photo downloaded, I read the words, and I gasped. Here are the sentences. "Your hair is too long. You'd look even cuter with short hair. Don't wear a skirt again. I want to see you smile more. I love you." There seemed to be no context, no theme running through the message. The handwriting was almost kind of scratchy. Seeing that really disturbed me. It was like a window into someone else's mind. I couldn't help but imagine how horrible it would be for A to have those horrible words in her home. I instantly messaged her back, and I said, "Come over. You can stay at mine tonight." She replied, "I'm too scared to even open my door right now." I rode the train to her side of town and literally bundled her into a taxi and took her back to mine. She stayed with her parents and at my place after that second letter. I guess she was staying away from that apartment for about a week or so. Even though she grabbed a few necessary items before leaving her place, she needed more after that week. She called the manager and told him everything that had happened so far. I said I would go back with her as moral support. I already had imagined that I would stand by the door while she stuffed her suitcase. We met the apartment owner, and he went with us to her apartment. As we got up the stairs, before we got anywhere you could consider close to her door, we all noticed something. There was a mound of letters sticking out of her door. We didn't want to get any closer. I know I felt that way, and the shocked gasp that my friend uttered told me that she felt the same. She stopped. I knew that she wouldn't go anywhere near that apartment when she handed me the key to her door. I decided I would do it for her. My friend was in need, and I knew that she was stressed out. I headed into her apartment, where the apartment owner stood by the door. I ignored all the letters jutting out of her mail slot and overflowing the letter cage. I gathered the things that I thought A would need the most, and I grabbed the letters and stuffed them into a plastic bag, and then I ran for it. I threw away all of those letters. I didn't open a single one of them. A said that she would never return to that apartment again, and stayed with her parents. Thankfully, the apartment owner actually had a heart and allowed her to leave without incurring any charges or being difficult about it. Since that experience, A has showed no interest in living alone again, which is to the delight of her more than slightly controlling parents, in my opinion. They love having her back home. They weren't that sympathetic from what she told me. Maybe they saw it as a lesson she was supposed to learn for some unknown reason. She's not just scared of leaving her family home anymore, she's now scared of letters and any kind of mail. I guess if you have an experience like that, you can imagine how living alone again can be absolutely terrifying. She seems to be carrying a lot of trauma. It's not nice to see. I get it though, seeing those letters spilling out of her door and wedged in the mail slot gives me the creeps. I still dread to think of the content of those letters. Hi, just a very quick message. Please subscribe if you like this kind of stuff. I hate to ask this. I don't like to make a habit of it, but I've learned through the analytics that about 70% of viewers are not subscribed, so if you want to hear more stories you haven't heard from Japan, please consider subscribing. That's all. Here's the bells.
I've always believed that I possessed the sixth sense, the ability to detect the presence of the deceased. I've witnessed inexplicable occurrences, and you can trust me on that. I've even heard voices on many occasions, often those of women. I found myself in rooms where I'd hear voices or catch a shadow out of the corner of my eye, and in some instances, the door to the room would suddenly swing open. When doors swing open like that, especially when you're home alone, it can be incredibly eerie. However, all the eerie and spooky paranormal encounters I've witnessed pale in comparison to this one particular experience that took place about 3 years ago. It happened shortly after I moved into my new apartment. The movers had just delivered all my belongings and furniture. Given the long day that I had, I decided not to unpack much that night, focusing only on the essentials. I got ready for bed quite early. Moving into a new place always gives me a peculiar sense of excitement. Initially, seeing the room somewhat bare allows you to imagine the possibilities for the space. So as I lay in bed, on the brink of drifting into sleep, thoughts of what to unpack the next morning occupied my mind. When I heard something rather peculiar, I must have been on the verge of falling asleep when it happened. I distinctly heard laughter, a sound seemingly emanating from the other side of the wall, possibly from the living room. This was indeed strange. I only heard the laughter once that night, and so I drifted off to sleep without thinking much of it. Upon waking the next morning, I was taken aback to hear the same laughter again. I was having my breakfast at the time. My immediate thought was that one of my neighbors must have quite an unusual and creepy laugh. Strangely, I couldn't discern what they were laughing about, nor could I hear a TV or any other sound. It struck me that maybe they were wearing headphones, which could explain the loudness of the laughter. Laughing without headphones on often leads to the lack of awareness of one's volume, I figured. Feeling curious and thinking it might be a good opportunity to introduce myself to my neighbors, I decided to give it a shot. Since it seemed like my neighbors were awake and at home, I stepped outside and buzzed their door. I should clarify that during this time, I was living in an apartment. Despite buzzing the door multiple times, I received no response. This lack of a response somewhat validated my headphone theory. As I turned to leave, I noticed another door exiting the apartment down the hallway. As luck would have it, This neighbor's apartment was further down the hall. He approached me and casually mentioned, "You know, no one has lived there for quite a long time, right?" This revelation took me by surprise. I didn't divulge the details of the laughter that I heard the previous night and that morning. Instead, I thanked the neighbor for the information and headed back into my apartment. I realized that my perceptions might have been influenced by my supposed supernatural senses. Perhaps some sort of spirit was attempting to communicate with me. Though the experience unnerved me, it wasn't enough to drive me away from my apartment. I was determined to stay put. After all, hearing laughter occasionally wasn't the worst thing that one could endure. There were certainly scarier things in the world. As 3 months passed, I continued to intermittently hear the neighboring man's laughter. The sound seemed to originate from the other side of my living room wall. Despite this period, a new sound began accompanying the laughter. It happened every time the laughter did, a sort of cracking noise that started to grate on my nerves. I even considered the possibility of a rat or some other creature gnawing at the wall. The idea of relocating crossed my mind, but the cost and hassle quickly dispelled that thought. I attempted to ignore the noises to the best of my ability. However, one night, when I was already in a bad mood, I heard the laughter and the other noise again. Frustration got the better of me, and I impulsively kicked the section of the wall that was the source of the sounds. Almost immediately, I realized how futile and silly my action was if I was dealing with something paranormal. Yet, to my surprise, something unexpected occurred. I distinctly heard a voice react to my kick, a male voice that seemed to come from within the wall. I also heard what sounded like crumbling from the same area. In a matter of moments, all thoughts of paranormal vanished from my mind. I hadn't considered the simplest explanation. Someone might have illicitly entered the adjacent apartment and been living there. This realization struck me with a sense of naivety. I wasted no time and promptly called the police. The law enforcement officers arrived at the building with impressive speed. They attempted to enter the neighboring apartment, and that's when a male voice erupted, shouting at the officers. It became clear that there was indeed someone inside. Later, I learned that a middle-aged man had secretly been residing there. He was high on substances when the police confronted him. To my astonishment, it turned out that he was the son of the apartment manager, and his father was aware of his actions. The father had been hiding his son's presence from the authorities. Discovering that a stranger had been living next door was undoubtedly distressing, but it was the most unsettling aspect of the ordeal. While the man's laughter had always given me chills, the sound that truly haunted me was a scratching noise. This scratching noise, I discovered, was caused by a kitchen knife scraping against the wall. The damage to the wall was so extensive that the man had nearly breached through the side and into my apartment. I couldn't definitively ascertain his intentions, but I couldn't rule out the possibility that he intended to gain access to my unit. There he was, relentlessly driving a knife into the wall while laughing. Strangely, the police informed me that he knew my name, yet I had no knowledge of him whatsoever. Something was gravely amiss, and my unease grew. Feeling unsafe, I made the decision to move as soon as it was feasible. In the aftermath of this unnerving episode, I've encountered numerous instances of paranormal activity, but I'd never relocated again. Strangely, the scariest entity to me is not of the supernatural variety, but rather another human being. Nothing can compare to the lingering memory of the man next door. There are nights when I wake up, wondering if part of me still hears the sound of his knife scraping against the wall as he laughed.
I have had some horrible experiences in the past, I want to share these with you. It all happened about 2 years ago. I got a job and moved out from my family home. One night I was walking home from the station as usual, after work. It wasn't a long walk. It only took about 5 minutes in total. I was heading home that night and I felt something was out of place. I felt as if someone was following me. I turned around but I didn't see anyone. I thought that I was just being paranoid or something, but this odd feeling lasted about a week. Every time I was heading home after work from the station, I felt as if I wasn't alone. It bothered me so much that I spoke to a work colleague about it, and he told me, "If you're worried or scared about what's happening, then why don't you talk to the police?" I didn't think I had anything to go on. I mean, what would they do about it if I told them that I thought I was being followed? I tried not to think about it, but then one night something happened, and my paranoia was justified. I got a letter at work. It was addressed to me. I opened it and shrieked. It said, "I'm always watching you." I showed it to my boss, but he didn't really care. He wasn't interested at all, to be honest. It really scared me. I didn't know if it was a prank because I had told some of my colleagues about my fears. I thought that would be the worst thing that would happen, but I was proven wrong. One time I got a call from a private number. I picked it up and a male voice said, "Are you just getting in? A little earlier than usual tonight, huh?" I was really scared and full of anxiety, but somehow I managed to muster up the courage to ask, in what I guess was a very shaky voice, "Who are you?" Knowing full well that this was likely the person who had been following me and who had sent that creepy letter to my workplace. "You're the guy who's following me." To which he replied something along the lines of, "Oh, you noticed. What a sharp sense of intuition you have. I'm actually surprised." I said, "I'll call the police." "That doesn't matter," he replied instantly. I felt my spirit sinking in my chest like a lead weight, so I hung up. I spent that night awake late, thinking that there was nothing I could do about the situation. I felt so helpless. I barely slept, but I did come out of the situation thinking that it wasn't completely helpless by the morning. I figured that whoever was stalking me knew my work and train schedule, so I decided to go to work by car. It was a little more inconvenient, but after that call, I didn't feel safe sat opposite a stranger on the train. I was still scared though. I still talked to my coworkers about what was going on. For a long while there was nothing. I figured that the stalker must have just given up and lost interest. My fears returned when I opened a letter one night after work. The letter hadn't been addressed. It was hand-delivered. I knew the sender before I read a single word. But this is what it said. "Yesterday a friend came over and you and her talked about me. I'm so glad you care about me and that I'm a part of your life." Throughout the letter it spoke of the contents of my friend and I's conversation. It was horrible. It was like someone knew your inner thoughts, you know? I thought about it for a long while, and the most logical conclusion that I came to was that someone had somehow hidden a listening device in my home. If that was true, and I felt like it was 1,000% true at the time, it must mean that someone had gotten into my apartment. Some stranger must have gotten in. If you ever suspect that this might have happened to you, you will know how that realization makes you feel so incredibly violated. I sat there thinking, whoa, I must have had a bunch of friends and co-workers over, not to mention the previous tenant that lived here, and anyone they had brought in. I had no idea who the culprit was. I have had mostly women over since I am a woman, but come to think of it, I've had a mix of guys and girls over for a drinking party once. Co-workers. Some other guys have been here too. Some other friends also. I had no idea if any of them was shady or capable of becoming a stalker. I couldn't figure out who the guy harassing me was, and I also couldn't move out. I just didn't have the money, and I didn't want a couple of weird letters and calls to give me a reason to leave the apartment that I really loved. I mean, what's the alternative? Go back home? Live with mum and dad? They weren't exactly local. Talking about my parents will send me down a whole nother rabbit hole. On top of that, I couldn't move even if I wanted to. Things quietened down after that, like it did before. And I just kind of thought, or maybe hoped is the operative word here, that the stalker had moved on. I think about 3 months went by incidents-free. I had returned to my usual work-life rhythm. My confidence was back. I carried on like nothing had happened. Things were all good for a while, until I came to a realization. I was missing something from my bedroom. Underwear. I was missing some underwear. At first I thought all the usual thoughts like, oh, did I lose that? I could understand me losing one article of underwear, like a bra or some panties or something, you know, that kind of stuff happens to everyone, right? But 3? That's pretty weird, isn't it? I live on the 2nd floor of an apartment block. I never dried my clothes outside on the balcony. Therefore, for them to go missing meant that they must have been removed from my apartment. I thought that something very strange was going on. It was terrifying. I returned one night to find a memo attached to the fridge. It was just your run-of-the-mill post-it note, actually. Occasionally, my mum would come over and leave me something in the fridge, so I thought that it was just my mum looking out for me, maybe. I took one look at the post-it without reading its full contents, and that told me it wasn't written by my mother. No one in my family, actually. The post-it read, "Have you noticed that your underwear is missing? I guess you wonder where it's gone. Well, I have it." I was scared, like to the point in which you don't know what to do. I was being terrorized, and I was scared. That is the plainest way I can say it. I called the police. I must have sounded so odd. I must have sounded so dumb, but I told them everything. They were not the most helpful people to contact in that situation. I mean, they listened, but they would always try to talk me back round to a message, and that message was, just move, it'll be easier for everyone if you just move apartments. That seemed to be the message coming out of my colleagues and friends too, but once again, I have to say I couldn't afford it. I mean, I guess that this is great advice for someone who could afford it, but I just couldn't. I hatched a genius plan after this. I figured that if I replaced the locks on my door, then the trouble would end. I mean, replacing locks seemed a lot cheaper and a lot less hassle than moving. I felt like it worked though. I even left a pile of underwear freshly laundered on my coffee table for about a week or so, and they remained untouched. To be honest, it was a temporary fix. I mean, I couldn't really live there anymore. I was a little reluctant at the time to admit that. I guess it was down to it being the first place I ever lived alone in. I was unwilling to give it up. I couldn't afford to move and I didn't want to be home alone at night, so I decided to solve both problems by getting a night shift job. I did it on the hush-hush. I wanted cash in hand, and if my day job knew I was moonlighting, I might have been in trouble. I know. Their sympathy for me and my situation is truly heartwarming, isn't it? I didn't care. My new part-time job kept me out of the house at night, and it helped me to save up. I decided to use some of the money I had saved to get some security cameras, or surveillance cameras. I don't know which is the right terminology. I thought that if I found out who was stalking me, I could show the evidence to the police and I could stop it all and maybe I wouldn't have to move. In Japan, honestly, stalking laws are lax. They won't do much until something, quote, happens. If they weren't going to help me, I figured that I might as well try to help myself. Right? I was really scared, I should say. I hated it. I hated that I had to work 2 jobs and be stressed all day and night. I was afraid of every guy that passed me on the street, and the ones who politely smiled scared me the most. It wasn't their fault, though. Scared but working. That's how I would describe that period of my life. Things got a little better when a friend of mine reached out to me. He met me at work for lunch. We were close friends back in the starts of our careers. We both joined the company at about the same time, so we went through training together, and we were close friends back at the start. It was great to see him again, actually. He was really sweet and he listened to my complaints and troubles and tried to offer his own kind of advice. He was such a nice guy during that tough time that I just ended up relying on him whenever I was down or upset. After changing the locks, I felt as if I was free again. Nothing happened for the longest time. And then about half a year after the lock change, something happened. I had to leave my job due to family reasons. I was disappointed to be quitting. I guess for some, it looked as if I was throwing in the towel or something. It certainly felt that way at times, but in all honesty, it was out of my control. If I wanted to leave due to pressure or circumstances out of my control, like, being stalked, then that's fine. Well, anyways, since I had to move back home, I guess I had to break the news to everyone. I had a farewell party at work, and I broke the news to the guy who had helped me through the tough times. So I went back to my hometown and settled back in. After a little while, he messaged me, and he said something like, "Hey, it's been a while. How are you doing?" We chatted for a bit, and he invited me to meet him somewhere close by, and I accepted. The guy who had been good to me got in touch and offered to come see me. I felt great about it, actually. It was like someone from a life I had once before coming back to save me from my current life at home. I guess that doesn't make sense unless you're me. Being back home was rough, and I guess that I was feeling nostalgic. Nostalgic for freedom. I had a new job, though. Things were going pretty well. In fact, he wanted to meet me near a park, close to my workplace. When we met, we walked around the park a couple of times. We talked about work and life and a couple of memories. I told him how I quit my job, stuff like that, and he seemed happy that I was doing well. I wanted to get across that I was in a much better place and genuinely a little happier than I thought I would have been to move back home. But then he said something strange. "I guess you don't care about my feelings then, huh? That's really insensitive, you know." I didn't really understand what he was talking about and where it was coming from. I wondered if I had accidentally said something rude to him or took his sympathetic ear for granted, so I replied, "Oh, no, yeah, I am sorry. I guess I shouldn't have unloaded all that trauma on you during those rough days. I thought you didn't mind, though. Did you not want to hear all that stuff?" And he replied as quick as a flash, "Yeah, I hate that stuff." It went super quiet, and there was an atmosphere after he said that. I didn't feel like talking to him anymore. He suddenly leaned over towards me and covered my mouth with his hand. I was so scared and shocked by his actions, I literally couldn't breathe. As soon as he did that, I knew that this guy was the guy who had been stalking me, and I began to tremble. Even though I felt as if I couldn't speak, I managed to utter a few words to the effect of, "You followed me. You were in my apartment." "Oh, good for you. Huh? She finally notices. God, never knew you were this insensitive." "Thought we were friends. I didn't know," I said. "Well, we're very different people, aren't we? I wanted you to be mine and fast. I tried to show you my intentions for months, but oh no. Here I am again, ending up as the goddamn friend, a role I have played before. I mean, God, how stupid are you? Can't you read the signs?" I was shaking like a leaf. He had one hand over my mouth and one clamped on my shoulder. "Why did you quit work anyway? What the hell was that about? Had you been a little more mindful, a little more aware of your surroundings, you might have noticed me sooner." I stuttered some kind of muffled reply and he cut me off. "If you can't have the foresight to think of others, then why should they care about all of your troubles?" I had only known his gentle and kind side before that day. I didn't know he was capable of such a blatant display of anger. I could never have imagined that he would flip out like that. I struggled and tried to break away from him, but he was too strong. He scared the living hell out of me with what he said next. Listen, relax. I don't want you to be mine in a place like this, but if you keep behaving like you are and you keep resisting, then I'll do it here." The park was positively empty. He must have known that it wasn't a popular one. I felt as if we were the only two people in there, just when things looked their bleakest, and I thought that I could see a look of dark contemplation dance across his face. I saw something else, or should I say, someone else. A dog walker entered the park. I believe that this was highly unexpected for him, so he let go of me for a split second, to appear normal, I guess. I wriggled free from his grasp. I looked towards the dog walker. I wanted to plead with her with my eyes, to show her that I wasn't here by choice anymore. When I locked eyes with the dog walker, I realized that I recognized those eyes. I knew her. She was an ex-coworker. She rushed over to me. Her dog was with her. It wasn't a small dog. The creep started fast walking towards the exit of the park, and I was left hyperventilating in her arms. I think that the only word I could muster was, "Why?" And she replied, "I thought that he was following you." She told me later that he made no secret that he liked me. He told numerous people at work that he had a crush on me. It felt like I was the only one who didn't know this. When all this stuff started happening to me at work, people naturally looked his way. He quit the company right before the locks got changed. I didn't know he quit because I barely knew this guy existed until he came in when I was at my lowest. Apart from when I met him at the start of working at that company, I didn't really see him at work. He was a little older than me. He was told by someone at work if anything happened to me or my place, then the police would be called. That's when he left, I guess. That was when things went quiet for me too. It all started to make sense. So, when my ex-coworker miraculously saw this guy heading in the direction of my parents' home, she decided to follow him. And thank God she did. After everything went down, I managed to move out of my parents' house and got myself my own place. I think the company I worked for is still operating. I'm miles and miles and miles away now, though. It was a horrible time for me. I didn't ever go back to that secluded park again near my old job. To think how close I came to having something so irreversibly horrible being done to me is something that terrifies me on a daily basis.
This incident occurred a few years ago, on the day that I was scheduled to take my driving test. In an effort to ensure that I passed on my first attempt, I enrolled in a driving cram school. As part of my preparation, I had a private lesson booked in the city just before my test. This required me to catch an early train to ensure my timely arrival. My class was located in Kumiyaga City, within the Kanoso district. I proceeded to my local train station and awaited the arrival of the first train of the day. This particular train was new to me. Although I was quite tired, I compelled myself to study. I found a seat on a bench and began using a driving test prep app. Additionally, I sent messages to my friends, asking them to wish me luck once they woke up. Approximately 10 minutes later, a train pulled in the opposite side of the tracks. I recognized this as a sign that my train would soon arrive. Placing my bag over my shoulder, I joined the line of people waiting to board. Suddenly, a voice from behind me remarked, "You're looking pretty cute." I turned to see a man in his 30s approaching. My initial thought was, "Don't make me feel so sick this early in the morning, man." I averted my gaze from him, noting that he appeared to be a decade older than me. While standing in line, the man followed closely behind me. Opting to ignore him, I positioned myself to the side, distancing myself from him. However, he continued to silently trail me. "You're cute." The unsettling voice sounded again from just behind my right shoulder. I truly had no interest in engaging with this guy. I didn't want to add stress to my day before the driving test. Seeking refuge, I moved closer to a trio of office workers, hoping their presence would discourage this stranger from further advances. I also hoped that they might intervene if the man persisted in trying to initiate conversation. For a while, I had my back turned to him, intentionally avoiding any eye contact. I was curious if he had left, so after a brief moment, I glanced back. Thankfully, he had disappeared, relieving me of his presence. When the train arrived, I boarded behind the group of office workers. Strangely, The encounter with the stranger gave me a newfound sense of confidence for the impending test. These workers took seats right in front of me, and the train departed. Given that my stop was about 20 minutes away, I utilized the time to study further on my phone. Suddenly, I felt an odd sensation, the feeling of someone's gaze fixating on me. I looked up from my phone, casually scanning my surroundings. My eyes settled on the source of my unease. About 3 meters ahead, the same man who had approached me earlier on the platform was staring openly at me. He did not break eye contact. His gaze was unwavering. I felt a wave of nausea. Had he been wandering the train, searching for me? It certainly seemed that way. This man, whom I found increasingly unnerving, made me extremely uneasy, especially considering my circumstances. I was an 18-year-old female traveling alone. The remaining 10 minutes of my ride felt like an eternity, and in my mind, I repeatedly implored, "Please keep me safe." Finally, we arrived at my destination station, Kanoso Station. The last leg of the train ride had been one of the longest and most unsettling periods of my life. As I stepped off the train, I could hardly shake off my fear. I felt as though I had narrowly escaped something dreadful. I found myself pondering whether I knew him or not. His persistent staring left me wondering if he might have mistaken me for someone else, or if I had perhaps forgotten him or forgot that I even knew him. Fortunately, the 3 office workers seated in front of me had disembarked at Kanosko Station, which led me to conclude that I could use them as a protective barrier once again. I positioned myself amidst their group as we passed through the ticket gate. Aware that my driving class was just a 3-minute walk from the station, I decided to sprint to my class immediately upon exiting the gate. Descending the stairs in haste, I could hear rapid footsteps behind me. No way, I thought. On instinct, I turned around to identify the source of the footsteps. To my shock, I found the man descending about 10 steps above me, staring down and smiling. An icy shiver ran through me, and fear gripped me like never before. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I sprinted as fast as I could and reached my class, panting and looking rather out of place compared to the composed students and adults. I doubted anyone else had raced to that class like I had. After completing some paperwork and formalities, I finally sat down at a desk. As I gazed out of the window, I saw that the man was once again staring directly at me. He stood in front of the station, and when our eyes met, he smiled and waved at me. A chill ran down my spine. In the midst of a classroom full of strangers, I grappled with whether to confide in someone or ask for help. Feeling unable to open up to anyone, I felt isolated as everyone around me was an unfamiliar face. Nonetheless, I managed to push the unsettling encounter from my mind and focus intently on my driving test. I channeled an unusual hyper-concentration that day, driving by the desire to distract myself. Miraculously, both the written and practical tests went exceptionally well. Passing the test filled me with elation, and my joy nearly caused me to forget the unsettling events of that morning. The day was long and filled with various errands, spanning from about 8 hours. As I concluded all my tasks, I headed back to Kanosko Station to catch the train home. Returning to the station where the morning's events unfolded, Kumiyaga Station, a clear recollection of the morning flooded back to me. Confusion gripped me as I questioned, what was that all even about? Did I actually know the man, or was I overreacting? After the passage of such a long day, certainty seemed elusive. Approaching the bicycle parking area, I wondered whether I might have blown the situation out of proportion. However, as fate would have it, the man was there, his unsettling grin intact. The memories of that morning rushed back to me, along with the accompanying fear. Although the morning had given way to darkness, my unease remained. Frustration welled within me. I needed my bicycle, but felt paralyzed by his presence. Annoyed by my helplessness, I pivoted and raced over to the station staff, confessing my concerns about being followed. I had contacted my father, who was fortunately wrapped up with work, and had arrived by car nearly 10 minutes later. Together, we retrieved my bike, and to our relief, the man had vanished. And it was more really fortunate for him, as my father was seething with anger. In hindsight, though, it might have seemed impulsive. I was genuinely grateful that I turned back and sought assistance from the station staff. Sometimes I reflect on the potential outcomes of that evening and if I hadn't taken that step. The idea that that man was waiting for me is chilling. I often wonder how long he had been lurking there. As a result of that harrowing experience, I no longer ride the train alone. I now prefer driving. The incident reinforced the significance of the driving license I had acquired that day. Despite the train being full of passengers, the man had been brazen enough to pursue me without regard for witnesses. It's unsettling to think that an individual like him could pose serious dangers.
I have been reluctant to post this. It's just way too close to home. But you know what? I don't really have anyone to turn to for advice, so, if you have any clue what I should do next, well, I'm all ears. My girlfriend is a victim of stalking. I'm not going to mention her name, or even where she lives, just in case the stalker is reading this. My girlfriend goes to college, university. She was living at her parents' home at the time this happened. Thankfully, her parents didn't live too far away from campus. I heard from one of her friends that someone had been calling her from an unknown number and following her home after classes. I was so shocked and disgusted at that. One of her friends said that someone grabbed her on the shoulder on the way home. I just couldn't believe what I heard. I decided I would keep an eye on her when she walked home, but at a distance, just to make sure she got home safely. Plus, I didn't want to make her feel like I was escorting her. I did this whenever I was free, which was pretty often actually. If I wasn't able to make it there in person, I would sometimes give her a call. Honestly, she hung up on me more often than not, and when she was walking home, it almost sounded as if she was sobbing sometimes. I really felt for her, I didn't really know how to help her, but then I thought of something. I heard my girlfriend ask her friend if she could go and stay with her, because she was so stressed out by all the stalking. I decided I would make use of my paid annual leave to stand guard outside her friend's apartment. I was going to patrol the area and make sure that they were both okay. I had to be prepared to step it up if the stalker was prepared to up his game. My girlfriend was going to be staying over at her friend's place, and I knew her friend lived alone. That made both of them seem pretty vulnerable to me. They were definitely targets in a stalker's eyes. I didn't really need to bust in and ruin their night. They didn't even have to know I was there, really. I just needed to watch over them, by any means necessary. I'm not that familiar or friendly with her friend anyway, so it would have been a shock if I just invited myself into her home. I was volunteering my time to ensure their safety. I wanted them to have a normal night, and not even know I was there, so I just stood watch outside the building. I saw my girlfriend arrive and enter her friend's apartment. I watched on, looking out for suspicious people. I saw the lights dim in the apartment, and then eventually go out when the hour was late. The apartment was enveloped in darkness. I took that opportunity to call my girlfriend to check in with her. She hadn't been taking many calls lately because of that stalker, but since she was with her friend, she answered. I didn't know how long I would have before she would cut me off. She was probably nervous or scared, so I tried to say a few words to reassure her quickly. I wanted her to know she was safe because I was close by. So I said, "Hey, don't worry, I'm close by." It had been a while since we spoke on the phone actually, so I guessed she might have been surprised to hear my voice again. It seemed like she was still terrified by this damn stalker. Her response to my kind words was little more than a short sharp scream. I heard her friend in the background question her. "Is that the stalker?" she asked. There was a bit of a scuffle, and I think that her friend took the phone off of her. I was surprised that the stalker had the gall to appear when I was out on patrol so close to my girlfriend. So I rushed over to the apartment building to brace myself for an encounter. Looking up at her friend's place, I saw the lights go on. I asked her over the phone, "Are you okay?" I could hear my girlfriend crying in the background. She sounded like an absolute mess. The only words I could make out were, "Help me." Then I saw the window open above me, and I locked eyes with my girlfriend's friend. She looked down at me and ended the call. She probably realized that they were safe, but I wonder who she called next, as I could still see her talking up there. Well, I needed to know who she was calling, so I went to her apartment door and I just started knocking. After a short while, a few policemen arrived. I told the policemen that I had the situation under control and I was going to find the stalker. And you'll never guess what happened next. They mistook me for the stalker. Can you believe that? I actually got arrested. They said that my girlfriend's friend identified me as the stalker. I told them that this was just a simple misunderstanding and we could resolve it, but they didn't listen. They took me to their police car, and I was sat down in the back. I told them that the real stalker must be hiding nearby, and they would be better off to go looking for him instead of arresting a guy who's watching over those two women, protecting them. They took me back to the police station, and I was questioned. I told them everything. I told them about me and my girlfriend, and they didn't seem to believe that we were an item. Now, pretty dumb cops if you ask me. They forced me to sign some stupid documents, but signing them meant that they were releasing me. Since then, the number of police patrols near my girlfriend's apartment has increased. I guess that I can cut back on my role as her escort, and maybe even watch over her a little less. It's been a year since all that happened. It seems as if my girlfriend is in a much better place. When I see her, it looks like she's gaining her confidence. I know what time she gets her coffee in the morning, and I make sure I'm there just to see how she's doing. Well, the reason I'm sharing this with you is because I don't want to sound anxious, but I have a feeling that my girlfriend is kind of moving on. I know I haven't seen her as much as I used to. I could probably do better in that respect, but she just can't move on, right? I deserve at least a reason for why, and a chance to fight for her. Like I said, it's been a year. And the police presence is gradually reducing. What if the stalker came back? What if he was waiting for his chance for the police to back down? She doesn't seem concerned by the idea that the stalker could come back. Anyway, I'm thinking of going to see her this weekend. It's really been a while. I honestly can't wait to see the look on her face.